Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Trey Walsh, and today we have on the show David Bailey, CEO of Bitcoin Magazine, and back on the show, Jason Maier. And this was a really great conversation. After our recording of the episode with Jason that I did a couple of weeks back, talking about a democratic strategy for Bitcoin, being quite critical of Donald Trump and those supporting the Trump campaign, such as David actually reached out to us and said, hey, I'd love to come on the show. I'd love to talk with you both and push back on your framing of the issue and just have a good conversation with this. And I knew that this would be a good conversation. I knew that David means so well and is very, very bullish and hopeful on Bitcoin and just wants to see Bitcoin succeed at the end of the day. Now, if folks want to listen to that original conversation and you haven't, between Jason and I, we don't rehash that full conversation in this episode. And Jason and I definitely have points of disagreement still with David in terms of even one issue voters and single issue voters, which Jason and I both said that we are not going into this and still critical of Trump and all of these things. But this was a really good conversation. David gets into some of the reason why he supports Donald Trump and supports these initiatives to donate to Trump's campaign and see Bitcoin succeed and see a presidential candidate in the US be open to these things, which is really big historically. And no one can argue how historically big that is. So this was a really great conversation. You know, folks are listening for a really spicy debate in this conversation. We didn't really get to that. There were definitely points of disagreement and back and forth, but it was a really good conversation that I'm really just happy to put out there, especially in Bitcoin, where left progressives can come together with folks that are more libertarian or critical of the state and talk about Bitcoin and different perspectives, being really passionate about Bitcoin and just wanting it to succeed and wanting it to be adopted everywhere so that everyone can benefit. So that's what this conversation was. We didn't even get to all the things that we could have. So expect a part two, I imagine, at some point, and hopefully we'll be doing more conversations like this because it really was a blast. And I want to thank David for reaching out, much respect, and coming on and doing this conversation into what may initially have felt like hostile territory with us progressives in the left being very skeptical of Trump. So really just appreciative for that. And as always, if you all have any feedback on this show, obviously you can see it and engage with it on social media in our Telegram group. And also you can reach out to me at hello@progressivebitcoiner.com. And as always, check out our promo links. We have $50 for Saz Mining to get $50 off each and every miner you purchase through Saz Mining, which offers 100% renewable Bitcoin mining and is the best way to stack sats mining through Saz Mining. So you can find that promo link in our show notes. And also Bitbox, it is the best way to safely and securely hold your Bitcoin private keys. You're going to get 5% off products going to the promo link in our show notes as well. That is bitbox.swiss/TPB and TPB in checkout. All right, I'll let you get to the conversation now, and we'll see you again next week. Good morning, David. Good morning, Jason. How are you both doing?
Hey, doing well.
Hey, doing well, Trey. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really excited for this conversation. Thank you both for joining. Thank you, David, for really reaching out and initiating this conversation, which I'm really, really, really looking forward to. I think it's very important in the Bitcoin space in particular. I think we're a community, a cause, a industry, what have you, that has a high standard that should be engaging in really rigorous conversation about some of the most important things on earth, like creating new money in a new global financial system. So I think this is really important. But before we jump into the conversation, I wanted to add an obvious caveat, an obvious statement. So a lot of this conversation is happening because Jason and I, recent to this release, recorded a conversation where we were quite critical of Donald Trump, of whether it's campaign donations to Trump, I would argue to any politicians in general, and being a bit skeptical of that as Bitcoiners, pushing back on that and talking about that. And David, you had listened to the episode, which I really appreciate, and want to offer some pushback, some feedback, some conversation to that. So this episode isn't, especially for our progressive and left-leaning audience, it isn't into, dive into all of the politics of Donald Trump, some things that probably obviously many of us, but at least Jason and I, would disagree with and not be for. This conversation is really, it's not to rehash that conversation that Jason and I had necessarily, or to go, but people can listen to that conversation if they haven't, then listen to this one. It's for David, I think, you to put forward your perspective, to have some robust conversation about that and go from there, really focusing on Trump, on possibly hyper-Bitcoinization, about how we can advance Bitcoin and whether a presidential candidate, or in this case, Donald Trump, talking about Bitcoin and people supporting that is good or bad for Bitcoin, somewhere in the middle, all of the nuance. We'll get into that in this conversation. So I wanted to mention too, because you had said this in a tweet to both of us, David, or a post, or whatever it's called these days, on X. You had said that you believe Jason and I were looking at Trump, the campaign, Bitcoiners like yourself supporting Trump in the campaign, looking at it through the wrong framework, the wrong lens. So I wanted to give the floor to you and kick off the conversation. What framework are you looking at this through? And you're very bullish on Bitcoin. I'll say that first and foremost, from what I know. Some would argue one of the most bullish people. Sorry, CK. With Bitcoin. So I'll give the floor to you. I'll stop talking. Hand over the mic to you, David.
Yeah, well, first off, I just want to say thank you to both of y'all for doing this. I know politics is like a sensitive topic that, you're not supposed to talk about in polite company. But I listened to y'all's podcast the other day, and I respect both of y'all. We actually published Jason's book, The Progressive Case for Bitcoin. And I think both of y'all are very smart. And then when I listened to y'all's podcast, to be honest, it felt like there was a lot of coping going on. All right, a lot of coping with, let's say, not a full analysis of, what are the big picture goals we're trying to achieve by this effort to get Donald Trump to embrace Bitcoin. So, we can peel back each of these different topics and issues. And, maybe another important thing to bring up is, like, I'm basically a single issue voter. I mean, I really only care about Bitcoin. I think that's one of the things that y'all are maybe critical of that perspective in the podcast, and we can talk about that some more. But when I look at the Trump effort, I'd really kind of boil it down to three goals. Okay, so the first goal is, even though Bitcoin is immune to politics, Bitcoiners, people who hold Bitcoin, live in a legal jurisdiction. They're exposed to political risk. They're exposed to bad law. And so getting elected, any political campaign that has a pro-Bitcoin policy agenda has a direct immediate benefit for everyone who holds Bitcoin in the United States. So that's like surface level, first layer. The second item is, Bitcoin has been rejected by both political parties for quite a while. It's only in this most recent election have we seen a significant shift from the Republican Party to embrace Bitcoin. Electing the Republican Party and putting up big dollars and large amounts of votes makes going against Bitcoin in future elections political suicide for a political party. So it's not just that we're trying to give a carrot to the Republicans. We're also trying to use the stick against Democrats to say this is a losing issue. If you go against Bitcoin, your opponents are going to raise huge amounts of money. They're going to get millions of votes. If you want to win elections, you also need to embrace Bitcoin. So that's kind of strategy number two at play. And I think, we're starting to already see some of the dividends of that from just the pivot in the Democratic perspective on Bitcoin over the last 60 days, which has been marginal, but it is happening. And it is happening as a response to the momentum and traction they see Donald Trump getting. Then probably the most important item, which is way bigger than U.S. domestic politics, is the international perspective on Bitcoin. So what we're trying to communicate to the world is Bitcoin is viewed as a strategic asset of the United States. So when we have any presidential candidate, any future president talking about Bitcoin, embracing Bitcoin, doesn't matter which political party that they're from, that sends a loud message globally that then forces other nations to reevaluate their geopolitical position on that topic and therefore their domestic policy on that topic. If the United States sees this as a strategic asset, if the United States is passing policy or pushing policy to dominate the Bitcoin market, what are we doing as a nation to dominate the Bitcoin market? So that is, I think, probably the biggest item when we talk about hyper-Bitcoinization and really global adoption of Bitcoin is the game theory of nation-state adoption. So those are really like the three prongs, let's say, of the Trump strategy. I think if there was one message that I wanted to communicate on this podcast, is that I think y'all are taking the wrong positioning on this topic. And I tweeted this at Jason as too, and I feel like somebody in the comments thought I was being like sarcastic or not. I wasn't. Like if the right way for us to play this as an industry, as a community, is that like we want everyone to embrace Bitcoin. And so, we're representing one prong of the attack, which is we're delivering, the talking points and the integration of Bitcoin into the Republican platform. The Democratic Party is on the wrong side of this issue. They're going to have to pivot to support this industry. Y'all have a credible network, intellectual grounding for the progressive case for Bitcoin. If anything, this is the best moment for y'all to be going to the people on the left and saying, hey, you've taken the wrong strategic positioning. Here is how you integrate Bitcoin and cryptocurrency into your platform in a way that's authentic to the issues that you care about. And so, like, we should be working collaboratively where we're each taking a different prong of the attack versus, y'all feeling like y'all need to convince the other, Bitcoiners that have a conservative angle that they should change their views or backpedal. Instead, y'all should be accelerating your delivery of your message because you're kind of the only people that can deliver it. Like, who's going to deliver it? So, like, who are the Bitcoiners that have progressive leanings? And there are some huge Bitcoiners that do. Like, how can you get them to champion Bitcoin with, progressive politicians and show the carrot side as well? So I think y'all have like a big opportunity and role to play right now. And you should not be looking at it as a negative reflection on, the typical political dynamic, but, as an opportunity to really like make Bitcoin bipartisan.
Jason, I want to kick it over to you and in our efforts. And I'll assume, let's say for this conversation that Jason and I agree with Jason on a lot of these things, right? Maybe not everything, but let's say Jason and I, especially Jason for longer than me. Jason was one of those handful of people, Troy Cross, Margot, even Peter, so many others in the space that said, okay, someone from my camp can come out here and try to contribute. And Jason was influential in that for sure. So Jason, being in this space and talking to the left and progressives, what would you say in response to that? Saying, okay, move forward, and also, like, I think you use the word accelerate, David, in terms of talking to the left. What would you say in response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, thanks for having me on, and thanks to David for suggesting that we have this conversation. I think this is actually the kind of thing that we need to be doing in the Bitcoin space anyway, having these kinds of conversations, right? And so I would say that I'm not a single issue voter, like David said. Like, I'm not only going to vote for Bitcoin no matter what, because there's other things that I care about, and I feel like just to justify that position, because I think there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin space are like, all right, you vote for Bitcoin, it's orange, and that's the way you go about it. I can see myself living in that world in 15 years, right? Like, I just don't feel like there's too many things that I care about that I don't have a political party that is going to accept Bitcoin and those other things yet. And I'll just say, like, my goal in writing a progressive case for Bitcoin a couple of years ago, and this is important in sort of like, how do you talk to people on both sides, and how do I sort of take up David's suggestion, which is to like get people on the left excited about Bitcoin. I was sort of playing like a long shot strategy behind writing the book without knowing it. Say, well, seems unlikely, but if there is an outside chance that I can get people on the left, meaning like voters and people who are like everyday people who might be voting for politicians, to know more about Bitcoin and to be excited about it. And I might be able to do that before it becomes this political wedge issue, because right now, like, when I set out to write the book, Bitcoin wasn't this wedge issue necessarily. I was leaning towards it, but I was kind of hopeful that we might be able to avoid that. And I didn't have like the utmost confidence and say, oh, if I write this book, then 100% I'm going to get people on board, and Bitcoin will never become this political football that people argue over. It was sort of like a long shot Hail Mary that I was trying. And I feel like, and the coping that David witnessed on the last interview that we had is probably a recognition that my Hail Mary did not get caught, right? Like it just sort of tumbled to the ground. And I feel like, a lot's happened in the last couple of weeks since Trey and I recorded that last podcast. But that was the hope, right? Like, if I can get this book into people's hands, and I'm not talking about Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden, I'm talking about the people who vote, in elections and just the regular populace. If we can get them excited about Bitcoin, then then it will be a bottom up thing. It won't be a top down thing, and it will be more stable. We'll have a more broad coalition of people that supports Bitcoin. And so that was always my hope, is to get a broad coalition of voters to support Bitcoin, apart from libertarians and conservatives, so that it's harder to attack and it becomes a political suicide to like not accept it and all of that stuff. My view and my hope has always been to do that from the bottom up, right? Regular people, voters, trickling up to the politicians and having them realize that there's just no way that you could ignore Bitcoin. You have to get knowledgeable about it, and you have to realize the benefits that it has for your particular viewpoint. And there's things on the left and on the right that people would like about Bitcoin. And my timeline for that was like much longer than what we have right now, right? So like I didn't think that was going to happen before the 2024 presidential election. I never had hoped that that wouldn't be the case. And so the idea that we have, David is I mean, I don't disagree with sort of the premise about what you're getting behind. Like if we can get a presidential candidate, if this happens and this will happen and this happens, like I can see where all that's coming from. To go and I don't blame you for going after Donald Trump, saying, hey, if we can raise some money for this guy, we can get him interested in us, if we can sort of have a meeting behind closed doors, absolutely. Like our intuition should tell us that if a major U.S. presidential candidate is supportive of Bitcoin, like that is a good thing. And I think it's probably true in a vacuum. I think that probably what is underestimated in all of this is sort of like the brand of Trump, right? And the reputational risk that Trey and I talked about in our last episode, which is to say, my vision of what I hope, my Hail Mary, which is to convince like regular people, like the people that I work with and play with and get to know, my family and friends, to convince them that Bitcoin is like valuable and that they should know about it and understand it. That job becomes a lot harder if you see Donald Trump on TV talking about Bitcoin in a positive way. Now, there's this other argument to me. So, well, he's doing it, and so the Democrats have to get on board, and it's this game theory thing, and if they don't do it, it's political suicide. That's just not what I was hoping for, which, I'm not entitled to get what I was hoping for, right? It just sort of like now it's all of a sudden it's become this supreme issue. Like it's happening now. Like people who, David and other Bitcoin mining CEOs meeting with President Trump, like literally having these meetings. So, and it feels, like more of a top down approach than I would have hoped for. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. It's just sort of my big disappointment is that, I know people on the left, like the progressive people who don't know Bitcoin yet, and they're just, I don't see a path forward to convince them that Bitcoin is a good thing if Donald Trump isn't in support of it. So I guess that's like the fundamental, like basic level of like my job as an educator, as an advocate for Bitcoin becomes harder in this environment than it would have been otherwise. On top of that, all the other things that we talked about in the last meeting, which is like, I'm skeptical about, whether this man's genuinely behind Bitcoin or not, or, all of those things we can talk about. But it comes down to that. It's like, I want to convince regular voters, like, like people who would normally vote Democrat, or like there was an option to the left of Democrat, they would vote for that. And there isn't. Like that Bitcoin should be considered. And I think that this is just a chilling effect on Bitcoin on like the pleb base level, not on sort of the political elite level. That dynamic will play out however it plays out. But the education like push that I was trying to go for becomes harder. So I guess I'll pause there and give others a chance to chime in.
Do you have any comment on the international perspective of this? Like, does that factor
Yeah.
into your thinking, or are you really only concerned on the domestic side?
No. I think that the internationally, I mean, yeah, it's a good point. I think that I like the idea. It says, okay, a president anywhere, but like a U.S. president in particular, or a candidate takes Bitcoin seriously, and therefore all of these other countries are going to now take a new look at it, consider it as a strategic asset, and all of those things. I think in theory, I'm in favor of that. That makes sense. I don't think in practice, in this particular case, it works out. I mean, David, I just don't think that Donald Trump has international, like the respect of the international community, so that I feel like it's more, and again, we don't know the future. So I'm anything I say about what will happen in the future, just take it as my opinion. But, we'll see how it plays out. But I think it runs the risk of becoming a joke in the international community more than like, oh no, everyone has to get on this Bitcoin, thing. So I feel like if it was anybody else, it would feel different. I just don't know. And, and I could be wrong, but I just don't think that Donald Trump commands the respect of the international community enough for other governments to take Bitcoin seriously just because of the campaign stance that he's taken. Now, if he gets into office and he starts doing things, then, we might have to, I might have to readjust that analysis. But in theory, yeah, it's great. Like, have somebody in charge of a country like Bitcoin that's going to force other countries to take it seriously. I just don't know that that happens in this case. And, I'm open to being wrong about that. That's my feeling about it.
David, I was going to ask you in response to that. Is it more the situation of the U.S. and the fact that a U.S. president, or any U.S. president in this case, would be articulating this, and the domino effect of that? Like, how much of this, and you've met him, and I want to get into that. Like, with Jason and I don't think Jason has. I haven't. You've met Donald Trump. You've been in these rooms. You've been talking with other key players around this. So you're very knowledgeable on the direct situation, where we're peripherally looking in, and going off of past experiences, past things he said, all of this stuff. So for you, how much is it about Donald Trump? How much is it about this is the candidate talking about Bitcoin right now? And to be honest, I'll be the first one to say it. The Democrats, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, have completely shit the bed on this topic. It's been super frustrating. It's made our job just as hard as possibly Donald Trump talking about Bitcoin has made it. For what Jason and I think are trying to do in different ways is articulate to the regular people to then hold their politicians accountable. Not trying, and I'm here in Massachusetts, I've said it many times, like I've reached out to just about everyone I can, including Warren's campaign. And I'm not the most influential person, right? But even my local politicians, local folks give the same party line answers. And I will say that it is a bit more of a partisan issue, even Trump aside, right? I think people are a little too glossy on that. The left, especially the progressive left, gosh, it has not panned out, as Jason said, the way I would have thought either. So in terms of, is it the fact that it's a presidential candidate and less about what party and Trump? Curious your thoughts on that.
And I took notes as Jason was talking, so I could come back and kind of maybe address a few things. But first off, I think it's both for the response to your question. Like, the definitely from the international perspective is that it's a U.S. president. Every country, like, half of their not half, like a big chunk of their foreign policy is basically trying to read the tea leaves and understand what's happening in the United States. The United States is the most dominant economy in the world. We are the most dominant military in the world. We are the dominant power, and maybe China is rising, but we are still the most dominant power. And so from their perspective, anything that a U.S. president says, regardless of what political party they're in, is a serious thing. Now, I understand that, there are some countries that are unfavorable to Donald Trump, but we're going from 0 to 1. So it's not like Bitcoin is this well-respected thing in the world, and then now Donald Trump is supporting it, and they're like, oh, now I don't think it's respected anymore. Like, It's already a joke to every country. Like, we're trying to, convert 100% of people thinking it's a joke to like 95% of people think it's a joke, and that'd be a huge success. So, I think there are a lot of countries that even if it's Donald Trump, would take it seriously. The American foreign policy apparatus, the American institutions are much bigger than Donald Trump. I mean, he's just a man on top of a behemoth. And so if the gears of the machine churn towards Bitcoin, like, that has reverberations up and down, throughout our foreign policy. So, I think, so yeah, and then I think that kind of begs the question, like, is Donald Trump's support of Bitcoin genuine, and will he actually do things? Like, will the gears of government actually churn for it? And this is why when you ask the question, is it the U.S. president or is it Donald Trump that is unique here? What's great about Donald Trump, and the reason why I think he's the first candidate to support this so strongly, is because he is an opportunist, and I don't mean that in a critical way. I mean that in a as a compliment. Like, he sees opportunities in the political landscape, in the business landscape, where he is able to raise money, win votes, and he is singularly focused on winning. He is singularly focused on becoming president. I don't know if he holds any of his ideological positions. I don't know if he really has ideological positions. I don't know him well enough to say that, but I think he is building a collage of positions based on the reaction and feedback he gets from the public, from his base, from donors. And so, it takes somebody with that kind of eye to see something like Bitcoin and see the opportunity. Like, Bitcoin is an incredible opportunity. That's why this sales pitch works, because it's like, wow, you actually can get a lot of money if you support our industry, and you actually can get a lot of votes if you support our industry. So, you need a candidate who can see the opportunity, or otherwise you just are ignored. Which is basically what's been happening for the past, decade for Bitcoin politics. So, so I think that's kind of a unique angle that has elevated this much faster than otherwise the trajectory would have justified. Now, in terms of a bottom up versus a top down, I do think that Donald Trump's support of this, and like his identification of what the opportunity is a bottom up phenomenon. Like, the Libertarian Party, a lot of Bitcoin support was grounded in Ron Paul supporters, the Libertarian Party, Austrian economists. Like, that was a lot of the initial grassroots support for Bitcoin. So, I think that over time, as that audience has gained money and resources, they've been able to project more influence. And, there's a lot of people in Donald Trump's circle that are pro Bitcoin, who hold Bitcoin, who like Bitcoin. His kids like Bitcoin. Like, he has sold apartments for Bitcoin. Like, there's a lot of activity happening around him with it. And if that activity wasn't there, I don't think he would have identified the opportunity or gone out on a limb like this to embrace it. So there is a bottom up phenomenon happening, and it's kind of an interactive, it's interactive between the actual political leaders and their base. So, I think probably part of the challenge is that the type of people that make up the Democratic Party donor base, which are the people who have the most voice, are not big Bitcoiners. So, at least to the same percentage as conservatives. So I think that, there's a lot of Democratic voters that like Bitcoin, but, to be honest, in American politics, like, the voters typically don't have that much of a voice. They are bullied around by the political apparatus and the aristocracy. So that's on, like, the bottom up versus top down. On, like, the Democratic position on Bitcoin more broadly, I think they really don't have one. I think Joe Biden does not have a position on Bitcoin. He doesn't even really know what Bitcoin is. Most Democrats, they are deferential to Elizabeth Warren to set the tone for what is the party line on Bitcoin, which has been a massive mistake. And I think that there's a lot more pushback happening as kind of her perspective has become inconsistent with, like, the feedback that that Democrats are getting, from their constituents and from donors. Maybe not as loudly yet as it is happening on the Republican side, but it is happening. And so, I really don't think that they formed a view and a position, and I think right now it's kind of primarily viewed through the environmental lens of Bitcoin mining being bad for the environment. And we have such great content and positions that have been formed about why that's not the right way to view that issue. And frankly, my experience has been is like, we're talking about Donald Trump being an opportunist and just caring about winning. Honestly, that's almost all politicians. They almost, all are just faking like they care about the issues. And it's really just like, what does the party tell them to do? What's going to get votes? What's going to make sure that the DNC backs their primary, in the primary, like it's all a self-interested calculation. And so, the reason, Trey, that when you're trying to talk to politicians, in Massachusetts about Bitcoin and they're ignoring you, it's because there's nothing in it for them. Like how are you going to help them? I mean, so they know Elizabeth Warren. If they piss off Elizabeth Warren, that's not going to help them. So they need to see the momentum it creates in their competitors, and they need to see the potential. We need to sell them the same opportunity that we've sold Donald Trump, of like how many votes and how many dollars there are for them to go and chase. So I think I hit on all but two issues, actually, all but two issues. So another one is like Jason was like, hey, this is going to make my job harder to sell Bitcoin or to evangelize Bitcoin. I hear you. I do hear you on that topic, but the same people you're saying it's going to be harder to sell Bitcoin to right now that are in your friends and family, you've been trying to shill Bitcoin to for how long? 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? These people were buying Bitcoin before this became a political issue. So, there's really kind of two types of people that embrace Bitcoin, in my opinion. One is people that become captured by number go up, and, number go up affects all people. Self-interest affects all people, does not care what your political affiliation is. As number goes up, people are going to be like, I hate Trump, but Bitcoin's got nothing to do with Trump. I'm buying it. Like they will find the justification for why they need to participate in number go up, because everyone wants to improve their life circumstances. The second group of people are people that need Bitcoin. So, I'm using Bitcoin because I'm an illegal immigrant and I can't get a bank account. I'm using Bitcoin because, I mean, go through the litany of reasons why someone would want to use Bitcoin that is disenfranchised from the financial system. Those people are going to use Bitcoin regardless of whatever someone's, like just because Trump likes Bitcoin, that doesn't change Bitcoin at all. Just because he says something nice about Bitcoin, that's meaningless for actually being able to use Bitcoin. So people who need Bitcoin, they're not going to ditch it. I doubt there's a single person who owns Bitcoin in the world who already owned it, and then when Donald Trump announced that he was supporting it, said, you know what, I'm out. I'm selling my Bitcoin and I'm walking away. So it like I hear you that maybe amongst like college educated, sophisticated, middle class to upper class Americans that have, access to all the financial infrastructure that already exists and already didn't own Bitcoin, that now they're a little bit resistant to Bitcoin for now. But I think that, we're not talking about a needle moving change from the status quo that existed before. And then the last thing I'll say, I know I've been talking a while, so I'm sorry, is on the single issue voter topic. I understand that there are other issues in America that matter. I am 33 years old, so I'm haven't been around that long, but in those 33 years, there has basically been in America widespread status quo across the board. You can name any domestic issue, and basically over my adult lifetime, that issue has basically barely moved. Abortion, environment, tax policy. I mean, you name it. Like maybe around the edges, marginally. but like, fundamentally is the same, even though, a lot of effort has gone in otherwise. And so I have come to the perspective that the system is so captured that the system is impossible to change. The system is actually built not to be changed. And the reason why large corporations give to each political party is to preserve the status quo. And so when I look at why am I a single issue voter, it's because I see Bitcoin as the only lever that we can pull that can affect change, that there's no amount of capture that can stop the change. It is the highest leverage point in the political apparatus to affect the ability for us to create money. So it's not I'm a single issue voter because these other things don't matter. I'm a single issue voter because these other things I no longer believe we have the ability to influence in a meaningful way.
Yeah, there's a lot you said there, David. Jason, I was going to say, because I'm going to be honest, like even halfway through this conversation, this is exactly what I thought it would be. It's just really great. Like I knew David would come in with really strong arguments. You've been thinking about this for a while, doing this a lot. And there are so many strong arguments to this. But Jason, I just wanted to kick over, because I'm sure some people listening will be, oh, David's dunking on you. It's like, that's not his intent. That's not our intent. This is just a conversation about people that care a lot about Bitcoin winning in whatever way that looks.
My instinct is that if we were having this conversation about an election happening in a foreign country where there was no personal attachment to it, that we would all already be on the same page. That's why when I watched it, I'm like, these guys are like sucked into the local political environment, which I understand, but like, like look at it as if this is like a foreign country that you're analyzing. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think too on that point, it's to what Jason was saying, that if I'm being very honest, I kind of already alluded to it, but it's like you're exactly right, David. Like the progressives, the left, they already weren't into Bitcoin, and Jason and I and fewer left like vocally in the space. We're getting exhausted trying to appeal to them. And I've said this on this podcast many times before. I'm like a registered independent. There are many days where I'm like, I couldn't do this every day, just like fully engaging in politics. But I know many people, the majority of people outside of Bitcoin Twitter, are in that status quo captured mentality. Whatever paradigm it is, let's say in this case, the Democrat left liberal and on certain things, on Trump, on this and that. So Jason and I trying to articulate to those people where Jason and I, we're a bit of unicorns, right? Progressives are like, oh, you talk about Bitcoin? Shut up. That's crazy. Or like, libertarians are like, shut up. You can't be progressive Bitcoin, right? So we're used to all of that. So if anything, it's not about us, but it's figuring out different ways constantly to appeal to them. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I can, and they will just get there when they get there, right? That's kind of the reality. But Jason, I'll kick it over to you.
I mean, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's a lot of what you said, David, that I understand like where you're coming from, and it makes sense. It just, you and I obviously just look at the world through different lenses, and that speaks to just like where we come from and our experiences. So, one thing I'll just say is that, you are right that the political machinery of the country is designed to keep the status quo in place, and that change is hard. But I've been around long enough to like have seen some actual changes, like for good and for bad, in my lifetime through the political system. So like I haven't given up complete hope. Like I understand like what you're saying, like, oh well, everything seems to be the same, but like abortion is not the same as it was 3 years ago for sure. Like, I remember when gay marriage was legalized through the Supreme Court, and now it's under threat again. Like these are things that actually make a difference in people's lives, right? Like, my neighbors who, are a gay couple who have 2 children, like their marriage is now under threat. So like I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of all of those other details, but just in terms of single issue voters, like, I just want to be clear, like why is it that, like the idea that like hate crimes spike when certain people are elected and then they go down when certain people aren't elected, like those are real things that like affect people's lives on the ground. So I would just be remiss, like given Trey's audience, like if I didn't just push back a little bit to say like the political system isn't designed to change quickly all the time, but there have been changes throughout time that are either good and are under threat or have been trending bad in my political like vantage point. And and I'll just say, like, the chief among them, in my opinion, and I mentioned this in the conversation, is like the peaceful transition of power within our democratic, nation, right? So like we can talk about, well, pretend it's some other country and all of those things, and when coups and like people like take over the government and like there's all that stuff happens in another country, like we think one way about it, and I'm thinking about it much differently in the United States. So I feel like that is a variable that not all Bitcoiners are going to be thinking about it in those ways. Like, there's a lot of Bitcoiners who probably don't care about gay marriage or think that it's not going to change anyway. So like, why, but I can see, like, I've seen a world with it and without it. So I want to make sure that my voting aligns with the values that I care about. And you're right. Like the people on the left, like there's already a hurdle to convince people on the left before Donald Trump ever said anything about Bitcoin. There's already that hurdle. And that's why I kind of framed my opening my opening bit about this, saying it's kind of like a Hail Mary. Like I was hoping that it wouldn't become a political issue. And I just don't know that at the time of recording my first conversation with Trey, I was really pessimistic about that happening, right? About Bitcoin becoming this like bipartisan bridge, which was kind of my hope to say, let's bring people together. Let's have conversations that are meaningful across political aisle. I'm a little less pessimistic about it now after a couple of weeks. And I guess maybe after this is a question to you, David, like the only thing that Bitcoin has done, and this is not the way I usually measure Bitcoin, but the only thing that's done is like gone down in US dollar price since Trump announced. And so I guess I'm a little bit less trepidatious about the impact of Trump being like a total negative thing. It just seems like people maybe don't care. Or like, I'm not talking about in the Bitcoin space, surely everybody's super honed in. And if you're in like the Bitcoin bubble and you're not looking outside of it, then it always seems like adoption's going up. Everybody, like all these new companies are happening. It's easier to use Bitcoin. All this stuff is always good. But when you zoom out beyond the Bitcoin bubble, it just seems like nobody even didn't come up in the debate. Like the price has gone down. You would think that if like, and my own intuition says like, if like the leading US presidential candidate who's about to win this election says good things about Bitcoin, I would expect the price to shoot up. Now, that's not the metric I usually use for like Bitcoin success at all, but it does indicate a curious question to me is like, why is that happening? And it makes me, and I would love to get your perception on that. Like, what impact is it actually going to have, or has it had so far? Because maybe you have a different perspective, but it makes me a little bit less nervous than the interview that you watched me talk about, because I was probably feeling pretty anxious that, oh, this is going to be this huge thing. Everyone's going to get attention on Bitcoin. We're not ready for it. It's kind of like the WikiLeaks thing back in the day. Like, oh, well, like we can't handle this heat. Like, let's not push it. Like, let's not like start sending WikiLeaks Bitcoin back in the day. That's how I was kind of feeling about it. And I feel like that has tempered a little bit. It just feels like, well, if nobody's really paying attention to it, then there's still a keyhole to work through where we can convince people that Bitcoin is a good thing for them. And maybe not. To your point and to Trey's point, maybe it's just when they get around a number goes up, then they'll start to learn. And if that's the case, then I'm glad that they have a resource to go to, and they can open up my book and say, all right, I want to get in on this number goes up, but I don't really understand it. Let me learn about Bitcoin. And now there's a resource that people can go to instead of me being an effective evangelizer, just saying, I want to give, like, I'm an educator. I want to give you this resource to learn about Bitcoin. Maybe that's the only way it happens. But I am actually less worried now than when Trey and I recorded 2 weeks ago, because it doesn't seem like it's gotten any traction in terms of the political discourse. Or like Bitcoin adoption, Bitcoin price action. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, David. I mean, I would love to know, because as Trey mentioned, you've been in rooms that I haven't been in, right? So I don't know like what's going on behind the scenes.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now you can purchase the BitBox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank BitBox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now.
In terms of, we can come back to the single issue voter topic. I think that's a important one, and I am respectful that there are certain things that people care about. I come I could have very easily been considered myself a progressive. I'm pretty anti-war. And when I just look at something like the war in Afghanistan, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's Republicans or it's Democrats. It's like, we just are in these forever wars. There's really nothing you can do about it. You have no say in it. It's just like, it is what it is. So, but I do understand that there are domestic issues that are important. So in terms of what is the impact this is having, and why is the price down? So I think first off, you have to understand Bitcoin in the political scene was very small and fringe, and now it's a little bit less than fringe. This is not Donald Trump says the word Bitcoin and all of a sudden we gain 100 million new users of Bitcoin overnight. When we met with Trump to talk about Bitcoin mining, the day after we met with them, all the miners that were at that meeting, their stocks went up 10 to 15%. Quantify that. That's hundreds of millions of dollars in added market cap to those companies. When Donald Trump said, we want Bitcoin made in America, there are conversations that miners are having with state regulators where, that has affected the conversation and the tone of the conversation and, who's an ally and who isn't. But those are, small mining facilities, mining facilities in a state where they're, single digit percentages of the power. So Bitcoin as a whole is still very, very small. And, Donald Trump's embrace of it is extremely important. It's going to have big long-term effects, but it just needs to be put in the context of it's still a fringe thing. It's still a fringe asset. I would not correlate Bitcoin's price performance with what Donald Trump's support. That was already something that we've been dealing with since the ETF went live. The amount of selling and liquidity that's been exiting the market, and so I know for a fact that the Trump's embrace of this topic has driven some incremental amount of demand, but not enough demand to overwhelm the amount of sell side pressure. I think really probably where I see the biggest movement happening, I'd say two different things. So the biggest movement I see happening is on the international side. So since he's announced this, we've heard from political candidates from, England, France, some of the countries in the GCC, Gulf countries, Canada. So without a doubt, the global interest in this topic has ticked up. And, I think really the major impact for Bitcoin happens if Donald Trump is elected and if Donald Trump follows through with some of the policy promises that he's made and he's going to make. And if that happens, some of the policies that he can affect will have an economic impact on Bitcoin that's measured in the hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars. So let's say reforming the tax policy in the United States as it relates to Bitcoin, or let's say letting banks custody Bitcoin on their own balance sheet, or let's say, already Donald Trump's positioning has softened the SEC's resistance to other ETFs. Now, not that I'm pro other cryptocurrencies doing ETFs, but that has already had a deca-billion-dollar impact with Ethereum, maybe even $100 billion plus impact on the market cap having the ETF approved. So there are some really big picture policy items that, if actually changed, have massive effect. I'm hoping Donald Trump will announce that we want to add Bitcoin to the balance sheet of America. If that actually happened, that's one of like the most bullish things that could possibly happen to the price of Bitcoin. But it doesn't matter until it becomes real, so to speak, or matter at least in its full potential. So yeah, I think it's really the international perception that it's affected, and I think it's the juice is really in, does he follow through once he's in the White House, and that's really what our challenge is going to transition to, is ensuring that he follows through. And if I was you guys, I'd be positioning yourself that the second he doesn't follow through on something, y'all need to be like ready in the lurch, like hiding in the bushes, like, oh, he just fucking lied. He got and get your like Democratic politicians lined up, being like, hey, if you had voted for us, we would have followed through. So so it's got to maximize
eager
pressure.
to do that, David. I'm eager to do that. I mean, I'm keeping all of the receipts. So
yeah.
I mean, I think that here's my, and I appreciate that sort of, it's somewhat behind the scenes look, right? Like if people are reaching out to you from other countries, and again, they might be like political parties within those countries that more align with Donald Trump, I'm sure, right? Like France just had their snap election, and the far right party, gained a lot of votes or whatever. But so all of those things are happening. That's all really good. And I mean, you might not be able to quantify it, but like, my concern, and I expressed this to Trey, is that Donald Trump is an opportunist in the sense that you used it in a positive light before. And I get what you're like, I get that argument. And I would say, and always have, that Donald Trump is an opportunist in like not the positive way. And I think that's a disconnect. This will probably play well with like Trey's typical audience and not play well with Bitcoiners. But like, I think a lot of Bitcoiners view Donald Trump in the same cast as any other politician. They all lie. They're all self-interested. They all just do what they can to get money and votes. And I think that is true of all politicians. And I also think that Donald Trump is like fundamentally different than that, right? It's just sort of like more. It's just like a genuine con man, not just like a politician.
I wouldn't use the word con man, but he's there's no he's not trying to disguise that he's an opportunist.
And to a point that's to be respected, and I get all of that, but I don't frame him in the same political, oh, he's just a politician. I think he's worse. Like, that's just my opinion. And I just don't know what are the likelihoods that he follows through on these things. I would love for Bitcoin not to be taxed for like purchases, right? Like, we have legislation that was like proposed that never, got approved, things like that. The U.S. holds Bitcoin now and they sell it, right? Like any Bitcoin they confiscate or the FBI takes, right? They sell it, and that adds to the sell pressure. It would be really cool if Bitcoin was on the U.S. president, like on the U.S. balance sheet. I just don't know to what extent those things are likely to happen, or that Trump follows through. And to your point, David, like I am 100% ready. Like if Trump says on day one, I'm going to free this person from jail, like I'm ready for it. If they says, on day one, we're going to make Bitcoin, you can transact with it and not be taxed as a taxable like event, like I'm ready for that too. Like those are be good things to happen. I just don't think that they will. And I feel like on some level, there's just a practicality in my calculus that says, like, given the probability that I assign to those things happening, it's not worth supporting somebody that I fundamentally disagree with about all other things. If I were to evaluate Donald Trump's stance on Bitcoin and say, yeah, like within the first month, these things are going to happen, and there's like an 80% chance that they'll happen, I might look at the whole thing very differently, right? But if I feel like there's a 1% chance that those things happen, then my calculus changes slightly or a lot. So I guess that's my take on it, right? It's like, oh, well, but he's scamming all these other people to get money and votes, but not us. Like he's actually going to do the things that we want him to do. And I just don't see that happening. And maybe I'm wrong. This is one of those instances I would be happy to be wrong, that Donald Trump follows through for the Bitcoin industry and like community and actually does good things. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah. So let me respond to that. So I think, first off, political lobbying, corporate lobbying is very effective. Special interest lobbying is very effective. And if you look at, Trump's last administration, If you look at Biden's current administration, we could go through every single item that's been passed, and we can identify which corporate lobby was behind driving it. So, special interest lobbying, sadly, is effective, and what we're engaging in is special interest lobbying for Bitcoin. So it follows that if it's effective for the space industry, it's effective for the pharmaceutical industry, if it's effective for the agricultural industry, it can be effective for our industry as well. So I think you got to kind of look at that through a consistent lens. I don't think Donald Trump has been bad about following through on his promises to special interest. And if whether it's changing corporate tax structure, whether it's establishing an entirely new branch of the government, the military, there's a lot of stuff that Donald Trump made happen that really didn't happen under any previous administration. So I actually think from that perspective, he's got a good track record. So the question of like, okay, well, what are the odds that he follows through? What we're engaged in right now is the process of selling Donald Trump on Bitcoin. When I'm tweeting about Bitcoin, when I'm hosting, organizing these roundtables or fundraisers for Trump, it's not because I necessarily think that what we're doing is needle moving towards him getting elected. I hope it is. I like that it helps us if we are needle moving. But at the bare minimum, what I'm doing is we are selling Donald Trump on the impact that we're having. We want to, it's like if you want to like fend off a bear, you need to raise your arms and appear as big as possible. We need to appear as big as possible, that we had the biggest impact possible on this election, so that we deserve the attention and prioritization when they look at their special interests, and that he knows what's at stake if he fucks us. So we are words are cheap. That plays both ways. Words are cheap from Trump. Words are cheap from the Bitcoin community. But at the end of the day, we are selling Bitcoin in a way that Donald Trump is receptive to buying it. We are taking Bitcoin, and we're not trying to convince him of the progressive points of Bitcoin. I don't bring up a single progressive point about Bitcoin when I'm talking to him. It is purely Bitcoin through the lens of America first. Through through all the things he already believes. How do we sell it in that way? So it's just that's a typical sales job. You understand what the customer wants to buy, you understand what the customer responds to, and then you figure out how to take the selling points of the thing that you got to get them excited about it. The better we do selling and the bigger the impact we have on the election, the greater the likelihood he follows through when he's elected. So this is not we get him elected and we are oh, yay, it's done, it's over. No, it's we get him elected January 20th, the real job begins. That's then the next level of this attack unfolds. And so the way to ensure that he doesn't follow through on his campaign promises is for him to make them, and for us as an industry to be okay, well, we don't fucking believe it, and so go do it, and then once you do it, then we'll support you. If we say that, it's he's definitely not going to fucking follow through because we didn't fucking do anything for him. Whereas if it's oh, you said something really good about our industry, you made a big promise. Okay, we're going to show up with $100 million. But hey, guess what? There's another $100 million where that came from. And if you follow through with what you said, there's a lot more coming your way. And if you don't, well, then we're going to have to pivot our strategy and go support somebody else. And so, that's how we create maximum pressure. No one's going to give us anything for free. The changing American policy is too valuable for it to be given for free. So it's we are trying to build the plane while we fly it, and I fully accept that it's possible we get rugged on everything. But if we get rugged on everything, we're kind of in the same position that the status quo that we're in now. So it's okay, our downside is where we're already at. The upside is we actually sell them, we actually create the pressure and the momentum, and some transformational policy gets passed. What's going to happen if on day one he does follow through and commutes Ross's sentence? Wow.
Yeah. And well, it's not my 100 million. So I guess the downside is that we just end up back where we are, right? So because I'm not contributing to it, so
For
I
sure.
get what you're saying, and like I feel like in that means that like you just keep doing what you're doing, right? And then like my job is to
Sell the other
like
side.
hold him accountable and say like, listen, you said you were going to do this and you didn't. Put pressure the Democrats to say, look how much money he raised for this like industry. And it is very accurate and very sad that like what you're saying is true, right? Like without the money, you're not going to get anywhere, and like U.S. policy is too valuable to like be given away for free. Like that is a very cynical and depressing viewpoint, but it is actually fairly accurate, right? Like I get what you're saying. And so like ultimately, like you're not going to find me advocating for Donald Trump because of the other things associated with him, right? Like there's just not a way that I can do that in good conscience. What I can try to do is to put pressure people on the left to say, look at the benefits that he got by supporting Bitcoin, look at the votes and look at the money that got brought in. I feel more comfortable doing that. And as I alluded to before, like I'm actually more optimistic about that now than I was when I recorded with Trey originally, just because I don't think that the landscape shifted. Like, my worry was what you just said. You're like, oh, Donald Trump says something about Bitcoin, 100 million new users, right? Like that's not happening. I feel like the discourse it's still a fringe asset. It still needs to be educated. Like people still need to be educated about it, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum. And that's true left and right and center, right? So I don't know that, you know, just to repeat myself, that I'm as pessimistic as I was when all of this news came out. Like my worry was that it was just going to immediately shut out half the population, and now they're definitely never going to consider it. I still think I have an uphill battle to convince people who are left of center that Bitcoin is worthy of learning about, and that it can actually aid them in the things that they care about. And that certainly hasn't changed. It's probably gotten a little bit steeper, that uphill climb, but it hasn't become impossible yet. And that was my worry, I think, 3 weeks ago when all of this news came out. I was like, oh, well, now like there's no way to do what I want to do. And I feel like now it's just still possible, but harder. And so if my job is to like push people on the left within my sphere of influence to get behind Bitcoin and then hold Donald Trump accountable when he doesn't follow through on his promises, like that's a role I'm happy to play. It's a lot different than what I was thinking about 3 weeks ago when all of this news came out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be great if we knew who the champions of Bitcoin were on the progressive side, and that you really helped identify and elevate those people. I think a lot of the donors to Trump's campaign and effort would donate to the other side as well, because again, they're single issue voters. They have one agenda here. So I do think that a lot of the progressive support also that's out there for Bitcoin has coalesced around RFK. He's raised a good amount of money from our industry as well. I really like RFK. I wish he was the Democratic nominee, but I like a lot of votes have gone there just objectively. And I think if you said something earlier, like you wanted Bitcoin to be this like bipartisan bridge. I think it is a partisan bridge. Like it does connect people together, but from two different lenses that they can look at it. And it's like, it truly is, Occupy Wall Street was huge. Occupy Wall Street was like one of the defining elements of Barack Obama's election. And so Bitcoin is Occupy Wall Street. And then simultaneously, Bitcoin is the Tea Party. And so it's like, it is this great connector that connects our destinies, but like you can take kind of polar opposite partisan perspectives on it, even though Bitcoin doesn't care what you're just projecting onto it, So,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think this is a huge opportunity. Just to reiterate, like a huge opportunity for the progressive side to have the proof to point to about why this is not just an ideological argument, but why this is a practical argument that if Democrats want to win elections, they have to embrace this topic. And you have the only formula for them that they're going to find success with. It's not like they can pivot to the America First platform for Bitcoin. Like you need to have like the I don't know what the progressive slogan is, but like the build back better of Bitcoin, So,
Oh God.
Yeah. um, build back better. And, and again, like I have a different sphere of influence than you do, David, right? So like, I don't see myself in a closed door room with like a presidential candidate on the left, right? Like, I just don't have that
I
access, and I
I
certainly
think you'd
can't.
be surprised. I think you'd be surprised. Your name has come up
Yeah.
with the when the Biden White House is saying who do we need to be talking to, it's like there's not that many progressive
All
Bitcoiners
right.
to recommend. So hone the talking points, man.
Well, all right, I'm going to keep honing my talking points, but I promise you, I have turned down 0 invitations to talk to Joe Biden about Bitcoin. I haven't turned down any of the invitations. So if that happens, that happens. And again, like, I'm happy to play my role in like the Bitcoin ecosystem and try to get people on board. I do think that my job is harder, but like maybe that's just the way it is. Like, there's no way around it, right? That's just where we are right now. And I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation too. I think that I'm going to give it back to Trey because you have to close things up. But I do think that I think it's okay not to be a single issue voter on this necessarily, but I do think that like whatever we can do within our spheres to hold the politicians accountable and to actually encourage them to keep learning about Bitcoin and however that works, I think we need to just keep doing that work. So
Absolutely. And I want to thank you both so much. I got lost just listening to you both too during this conversation. I'm really proud of it. I think what it does, I didn't know exactly it would do this, but I think if anything, it's kind of going forward. And like you said, there's a lot of Bitcoiners, and it's kind of interesting too. These corporations, of course, they're going to be single issue voters in terms of this policy and this lobbying. That makes sense. There's going to be many Bitcoiners that are single issue voters. There might be many progressives to the left that are listening to this that are not single issue voters, but hopefully can understand, as Jason was saying, I don't know how else to say this. It's kind of like with Trump, Bitcoin can still be for you or for anyone. Just having a normal conversation about Bitcoin and like, yep, these people are going to support Trump. These people are going to support this, or these people are going to hold Bitcoin and do it. All of these are you can still hold Bitcoin and be who you are in that. And I love that articulation, David, of you can be partisan in your Bitcoin approach, or and again, partisan in not a negative term. And I personally believe we're just still very early for Democrats and progressives, right? We're really early for progressives understanding how bad police surveillance is, but not understanding how bad financial surveillance is. And I haven't quite understood that yet. And I'm waiting to crack that with certain progressives and especially like young leaders in places like New York City or other metropolitan areas around the US. I just think we're really early with that part. I'm also not one to care too much if Elizabeth Warren gets it. I hope she retires soon anyway, right? But I really care about younger people, like mobilizing younger people in the states to do that. And like you said, some of the earliest people in Bitcoin were libertarians, were folks on the right. So for me, probably what I got out of this is just patience and just keep going, and that things are going to be okay at the end of the day. But yeah, I'll kick it back over, David, Jason, David, to you if you want to say any last words here. Again, I mean, people can follow you on X and all those places, but anything like that. And again, just thank you for coming on and doing this.
Thank you for engaging, and the last comment I'll make is just like there's going to be a lot of maybe this is not a PC way to put it, but ball gargling and dick riding that's going to happen over the next over the next 6 months. And I asked my progressive Bitcoin friends to just understand that we're selling. We're selling hard, and we're taking one for the collective team. So just just stomach it a little bit, and figure out how we can work collaboratively, and don't be stressed out about Bitcoin's embraced by one political party. Your time will come soon, and use this as a tool towards your ends.
Yeah, definitely. Jason, over to you. Anything else?
No, I appreciate the conversation, and again, like, I'm leaving this conversation more optimistic about sort of the path of Bitcoin. I think that like Dave was saying, best case, what happens is the Democrats get on board and see the potential that this has within the political arena. Not exactly my vision of it. Like I wanted it to feel more like voter based, but if it's going to be money based, then I think that maybe that's an opportunity. So I'm not completely pessimistic about it. But Trey, I appreciate the conversation. I think people can follow me on X and check out the book. If you want to know how to talk to progressive friends about Bitcoin, like check out the book, A Progressive's Case for Bitcoin, published by David's Fine Company. And again, like the whole goal is to get everybody on board, right? Not just half the people. So if that's your goal, then I'm mission aligned with you, and we'll go from there.
Awesome.
All right, guys,
well, once again in Bitcoin, unlikely forces coming together. This is so cool. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ciao.